Hello, I'm Peter Smith, and welcome to And Did Those Feet, a podcast devoted to the golden age of English football. 25 years from the end of the war in 1945 to the 1970 Mexico World Cup. And joining me to discuss the visit of Hungary to Wembley in November 1953 is Karl. Hello, Karl.
Hello, Peter.
Karl, am I exaggerating when I say that this was the second most important match in English football history? What was the background? Let's discuss Hungary first.
Yeah, well, I don't think you are wrong at all. I think it's an exceptionally important match. Hungary, well, I mean, certainly looking back now, I think we can recognise that they, at that time, had the best team in the world. There was a recognition, even before the match at Wembley, that they were among the best teams in the world, but perhaps in England there was still a certain complacency about, well, England are still England and the very best. But the Hungarians had won the previous Olympic Games, which was a much bigger deal then than it is now, and were on a very long unbeaten run.
Yes, 22 games, I think it was.
Yes, I think that's right. But I think perhaps,
and I think Karl as well, they were brilliantly prepared.
Yes, they were. But I think one of the reasons why the game was so significant is that it was winning at Wembley that more than anything showed how good they were. Perhaps logically, that game shouldn't have been necessary to demonstrate that. But I think this was the game that really did, more than any other, show that this was one of the great football teams of all time.
I agree. I mean, I think that they were really quite revolutionary. I think there was a lot of strength in Central European football in the early 1950s, by the way. I think, West Germany and Austria and Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia were quite a force in those days. And actually in the 50s, I think in the 50s, that Yugoslavia played England several times and tended to beat them. So it wasn't just that Hungary were a really strong. What was the malaise in English football then? Was there a malaise in the international side, or was there an imbalance between the quality of the club game and the international side, or was the international side just simply moribund tactically and had no imagination and flexibility in how it was going to kind of take the game forward? It was quite a traditional kind of setup, wasn't it?
Yes, I suspect it was more to do with tactics than anything else. I mean, you could argue that the player-by-player England were going through something of a transitional period, in that the team in the immediate post-war years, that included certainly the forward line at that time, that included players like Mannion and Lawton, was a very good side that had some excellent results. So one problem was that it was slightly a transitional period, but I think it was more to do with tactics. And it's very telling, I think, that Hungary's last game before they played England was a 2-2 draw at home to Sweden. Now, you could make the case, I think, that Hungary were preparing for England, and that game wasn't as significant for them.
Oh, I think that's true. Yes, I think that's absolutely true.
I think there's some truth in that.
The big game was the England game.
Yes, nevertheless, it was a very good result for Sweden. And tactically, they got something right that England got very wrong, which was recognising that Hungary played a number 9 in Idikuti, who was not a centre forward.
Exactly. This is what Kenneth Wolstenheim is commenting on in the commentary when he says he's wearing number 9, but he's not the centre forward. This was confusing because in England up to that point, it was accepted that if you wore a certain number, that was where you played. It was a little bit. It reminds me a bit of rugby, where if you're the number 8, that's where you play, and we know what you've got to do because you're wearing number 8. Now in football, number 8 can be the goalkeepers for all the difference it makes. And England got confused by the fact that they were really nobody was popping up where they expected them to be, and this speaks to, again, I think, to inflexibility of the thinking of English football at that time. One of the curiosities about this match, it seems to me, is that while it
I
was
mean,
it was deeply humiliating to be beaten 6-3 at home, let's not forget the first time that England had been beaten at home in any football match against a team from the continent or South America. In other words, from a team outside the British Isles, the first time they'd been beaten at home. And, it was the inflexibility of their thinking which really did for them here.
Yeah, well, a couple of things. First of all, the significance, because it might seem strange that a game that wasn't part of a tournament should be important. But the World Cup was not at that time what it is now. And England, of course, had that very embarrassing result in 1950, losing to the States.
They had.
Brazil. But I think that's a result that looks worse now, or looks more significant now than it did at the time. Because, strange as it might seem to us today, a game at Wembley was of more significance than playing Johnny Foreigner in some newfangled tournament on the other side of the world.
That's absolutely right.
And so that was one reason why it was perhaps not as significant as the Wembley game. Also, I think it is fair to say that 1950 game was something of a freak.
It was, I think, and those games do happen. You do occasionally see a sort of attack against defence game in which the attack simply cannot get the ball in the net. I remember Poland coming to Wembley in 1973, and it was just one-way traffic for 90 minutes, but England just couldn't score, and they did get a goal in the end, but it was too late. It was a 1-1 draw. I think this game, the game against Hungary, 20 years earlier than the Poland match, I think it was both humiliating and liberating in a way, because what it said to the English team was, you've got to start again. Where you've got to so far, you've still got the most brilliant league in the world, probably. You've got the best competitions in the world, in the FA Cup, the home internationals and so forth. But your thinking it needs refreshing. And you've got to think again about that. Of course, this is one of the things that Hungarians did, was they rethought every aspect of the game, if you like. And that was really, I think we're saying, that was the basis of their triumph, was the fact that they were tactically superior and actually, mentally superior. And I think that's one of the reasons why we can say this is the game that begins. It's the kind of end of one era and it's the beginning of the other. And 12 years later, or 12 and a half years later, England show, after all, this is a period in which there's huge tactical innovation going on. Brazil is about to bring in the back four. 10 years later, Ramsey brings in the wingless wonders. And, everything is now being challenged. And England, now we're going to get on board with that. And that was really what I think in some ways was quite a liberating match for England.
Yes. One of the things that really strikes me when we talk about the tactics is how little excuse England had. Because I find it fascinating to read the Times newspaper in the build-up to the game, because the reporter in the Times knew that Hidekuti wasn't a centre-forward. And Sweden certainly knew that it was necessary to mark him and to not mark him with a centre half. And of course, one of the things that's really interesting is who the manager of Sweden was.
I think you're going to tell us who that was.
Yes, a chap called George Rayner, an Englishman. And it's quite staggering, really, that there was so much complacency in England that it wasn't as if Hungary were a team from a different planet. As I say, the writer in the Times knew that it was necessary to mark Hidekuti, and George Rayner knew it. So England really had precious little excuse. But I think that does speak to overconfidence, complacency, whatever.
That is absolutely right. And of course, they exuded overconfidence and complacency coming out onto the pitch. Stanley Mortensen, the centre forward for Blackpool, and said to Billy Wright, he looks at the Hungarians as they're marching out in their cutaway boots, not unlike modern boots. And meanwhile, England is still wearing the sort of hobnail boots that you used to climb a mountain. And he says to Billy Wright, he says, I think we'll be all right here. They haven't even got the right kit. And this is this is a game which spurns plenty of very quotable quotes. If there is a football dictionary of quotations, that one goes into it. So does the reference in the Times to the fireman going to the wrong fire. But it's a real indication of how complacent England were. And of course, they got a shock in the right from the start, because within 45 seconds, Hungary are ahead. And it comes to an almost really quite sort of anodyne sort of it's a move, really, as far as the ball breaks to Hidegkuti from a throw in. He dummies his way past Johnson, who really sort of ushers in the centre half, who lets him through. To all intents and purposes, there's no challenge on him, and he bangs it into the corner of the net from 20 yards. It's a very good shot. It's very accurate. Merrick, the goalkeeper, looks to me to be half asleep, I must say. And actually, it's a terrific start for the Hungarians. But yes, the curious thing, is that in those first 10 minutes before England then contrived to equalise, but in those first 10 minutes, England produced quite a lot of good movement and quite a lot of good opportunities. And it's really a flaw to think that England were overwhelmed early in the game. They were 1-0 down, but in the next 10 minutes, they were pretty good. And it was only a lack of precision in the box. They had plenty of chances, I think, in those first 10 minutes, plenty of opportunities, plenty of possession in the opposition box, curiously enough. And so although Hungary then have a terrific goal, disallowed for offside, quite wrongly disallowed for offside, England are back level after 18 minutes through Sewell. It's a very good goal, isn't it, too?
It is. He took that very well. And I remember when we watched the game together, Peter, you pointed out how Wolstenholme, the commentator, I can't remember exactly what he said, but something
must score. Sewell must score, he said.
That he must score, that's right. As if this was an easy chance, which it was anything.
And he's got one. There's only one place to aim, and he aims it there, and he hits it.
So I think what you're saying there, in that some of the opening part of the game, when it went to 1-1, is perhaps an indication that in terms of individual talent, maybe the gulf wasn't quite as great as we might think. I think there was a gap, but maybe the true gulf was in the tactics.
Yeah, I think so, and the coherence of the team. The fact that maybe we come on to the question of selection at some time, but the fact was that Hungarian team had played together for 2 years and had been, listen, it was a communist country, you could do what you wanted. Or the government could. The players had been extracted. They'd been put into the government team, Honved, or at least 6 of them, I think, were Honved players, and they knew they were terribly well prepared, and I think that is probably the major. There were selection issues for England, quite clearly, and I think it's still pretty surprising that people like Nat Lofthouse weren't picked. But even so, the England selectors, the England selection method was extremely strange. It consisted, as you know, of a committee of club owners, club chairmen, who would quite randomly, at times, make their own decisions about who was going to play. So anyway, the point is that after 20 minutes, England are 1-1, and it's not going too badly for them. They're holding their own. They're making good chances, and they're it's and they're in the game. However, then comes 10 minutes, explosive minutes, in which Hungary takes a 4-1 lead and basically finishes the game. What was the most sort of striking feature of that period in the game, do you think? I mean, it's the brilliance of their finishing, but what else?
I think it's just England not being able to cope with the style of Hungary's play, the short passing, and Hidegkuti in particular, the space that he had. He'd got the freedom of Wembley to be knocking the ball around, and then of course you've got. I say there wasn't a golfing talent. Maybe the one player who maybe contradicts that a bit is Puskas.
Yes, I think that's got to be right. I agree.
Yeah, because he scored the probably I think certainly the most famous goal of the evening, where he made poor Billy Wright, as you referred to, looked like a fire engine going to the wrong fire, when he dragged the ball back and Wright went sliding through, and Puskas made look easy what was an incredible piece of skill.
The fourth goal is very odd as well, because it's a free kick, if you remember, and it's really smacked towards the goal, but it's not at all. I mean, I could have saved that, and yet Merrick appears to misjudge what's going on. The ball seems to roll. Merrick seems to think it's going past his post, and he more or less ushers the ball past, as he understands it, past the post, only to find it netting in the corner of the net. and that was an incredibly important goal that took the game from 3-1 to 4-1. And
Yeah.
maybe that's
Then it
the most
really
significant
was.
goal of the game, and it's a really awful error.
Yes, well, I think again talking about selection and
Yeah,
the talented players,
yeah,
maybe one of the differences between the sides was that they weren't really weak links in the Hungarian side. They certainly
no,
didn't seem to be.
mm,
Whereas,
agreed.
unfortunately for England, they were weak links, and maybe Gil Merrick was the prime example of that.
Well, I think he was, and I think the other one is left back Eckersley of Blackburn, and both
Yes.
Merrick and Eckersley are playing in the second division at this point,
Yeah.
which is extraordinary. And I took the trouble of looking up what were their weeks then. How did their weeks work? Merrick's week was a very odd one. He was away to Bury on the Saturday. He then came back to Wembley to face the best team in the world on the Wednesday, and then it was off back to Birmingham later in the week and away to Oldham Athletic 1-3-2. And Eckersley playing for Blackburn was away to Luton on the Saturday. Then came the dates with Destiny and Frank Puskas on Wednesday, and on the Saturday following, 28th November, away to Plymouth Argyle. Now, I don't think that's any way of suggesting that Bury at home and Luton away are the right way to prepare for a date with the best team in history, which is what the Hungarians were at that time. So if they're a bit off the pace, I think it's possible to forgive them. So to the second half. Well, of course, England do get a goal back at 4-2, and half time comes. And I reckon that Walter Winterbottom must have said, "Now, come on, boys, bit of a burst in the beginning of the second half. Let's have a really strong 10 minutes here, and we'll see what they've got." And instead, what happened was Hungary scored 2 goals in those 10 minutes, both absolute cracking goals. Pushkas the orchestrator, Hidekuti the finisher, and by the 55th minute, I think I'm right in saying Hungary are 6-2 ahead and the game is finished.
That's right. The Puskas goal with the drag back is probably the most famous goal in that game. But I've got to say, my personal favourite is the 6th goal, where Puskas plays a beautiful pass, sort of diagonally into the area for Hidekuti to finish. And I think what I realised watching that and then reading a bit more about Puskas, I think at one time I thought he was maybe the Gerd Muller of his day in terms of being a goal scorer.
Yeah.
Watching him play in that game, it's as if he was a combination of Gerd Muller and Michel Platini.
Yeah.
He got the goal scoring ability of somebody like Muller.
Yeah.
But he got so much more.
He was
a wonderful creative player, as well as the goal scorer that I'd always known him to be.
Well, he was more successful than this. I'm going to make a comparison. He was more successful than this particular character, modern footballer, but he was, like this player, a 9 and a 10 combined. The player I've got in mind is Harry Kane. And of course, it's worth bearing in mind that Ferenc Puskás went on to win 3 European Cups, along with a whole host of other trophies. So perhaps the parallel ends there, if I'm being unfair. But no, it was of course, Puskás left Hungary directly after the 56 invasion by the Soviets, and ended up playing in Spain and then coaching in Australia, I think. But one curious thing about Ferenc Puskás, he's a German-speaking Hungarian, so very unusual, I think, because I think it must be he may well have been the only German speaker in the team. And of course, the fate of the Germans in the Second World War after the Second World War in Eastern Europe was incredibly vicious. You know, they had a terrible time, and it's very interesting that he is perhaps the most distinguished former German or German-speaking person to emerge from Eastern Europe after the Second World War. And it's a curious thing. Now, of course, the game does conclude with Ramsey's penalty, so as to make it 6-3 and restore a certain credibility or respectability. But we must get on to the next stage of this. But it is worth remembering that Hungary then go on to beat England 7-1 in the replay, as it were. And so the worst defeat that England has suffered at home and away is to Hungary in these 2 matches, 6 months apart, November 63 and May 64. sorry, 53 and 54, and then preparation for the World Cup. Do we want to talk about Hungary in the World Cup of 1954?
Well, I think it's what's interesting is just I think we do, but just before the 7-1 game, I think perhaps shows just how almost kind Hungary were to England at Wembley, because there was still about half an hour to play after Ramsey scored his penalty, and Hungary were a little bit like a cricket team declaring, I think.
Could have been 10.
But then the 7-1, they seem to have a bit less mercy. And what I think is very striking about that game is, for example, Tom Finney, who'd been injured for the Wembley game, was back. You mentioned Eckersley, who played at Wembley. A more obvious choice would perhaps have been Roger Byrne, who played for United. He'd already won the league with Manchester.
We should say for Leeds United supporters that when we talk about United, we mean Manchester United.
I am sorry. Manchester United, I'm doing that.
Some United supporters will be horrified.
That's terrible of me, I know. So Roger Byrne, who had already won the league with Manchester United, he played along with Finney in that game in 1954.
And in the next 30 internationals or thereabouts, he became an absolute regular as a replacement for Eddie, and he was clearly a good choice. They couldn't find another right back. I don't think they had problems finding a right back until Jimmy Armfield came through. But of course, Ramsey had made up his mind about what he had seen. He then Ramsey retires in 55 and goes off to manage Ipswich Town, where he takes them miraculously from the 3rd Division South to the 1st Division Championship, an extraordinary achievement. But of course, the game does have its own Karl, because 6 of these players never appear for England again. And so players as distinguished as Mortensen, that's it now. They're not going to play again. And, we ought perhaps to mention one curious, if we mentioned the German speaker on the Hungarian side, we should perhaps mention the amateur on the England side.
Of course, yes.
George Robb, who played on the left wing in late replacement for Tom Finney. And he's a school teacher in North London. And he's got a late call. He plays for Tottenham. He's a late call-up, and he gets a day off work. And presumably he has to explain to the head teacher that he's going to be performing in front of 100,000 at Wembley the next day, and said that he's just about allowed to get his time off. And
again, just one of those lovely indications of how different football was in those days,
isn't it? Yes,
but sorry, Peter, I didn't mean to stop you talking about the 54 World Cup, which really was remarkable, because I think Hungary being as big a favourite going into that World Cup and for the final as any team has ever been.
And were by far the best team in the World Cup.
Yes, and famously they made mincemeat of West Germany in the group stages, beat them 8-3, and then in the semi-final won an absolute classic against Uruguay.
That's right, the champions, the holders,
who had never lost a World Cup game till that point, and they beat them in the semi-final, and then in the final somehow contrived to lose to West Germany, having been 2-0 up.
And totally dominating the second half, apparently.
Yeah.
Of course, it's worth remembering, when you mentioned Uruguay, it's worth remembering that Uruguay had won the World Cup in 1950, so Hungary had already beaten the holders. And bearing in mind that, to go back to the question of England, when Uruguay won the World Cup in 1950, nobody from the FA thought it was worth their while to watch the game. Extraordinary, really, when you think about it, to watch the game. And so no notes were taken, no lessons were learned from the 1950 World Cup. And when we actually had passed over England's performance in the 1954 World Cup, and of course they have 3 more failures in World Cups, really, 54, 58 and 62, before Ramsey is finally given the keys to the kingdom and gets to impose his own vision on England's team, and with the result that we all know. So maybe in conclusion, we could just talk briefly about the impact of 53 on Ramsey and on English football in general, and in particular on the 66 World Cup. One thing that's famous about this game is the audience, the crowd. Everybody who's anybody is at this match. Bobby
Yes.
Robson, who's playing for Fulham, he's there. Malcolm Allison, who's playing for West Ham, he's there. Ron Greenwood, who goes on to manage, I think he plays for Brentford at this time. He goes on to manage West Ham to the European Cup Winners' Cup, mind you, in the 1960s. Yes. He's there. And it is a game which has an immediate impact, isn't it? So
yes.
Do we think that without this game, England would not have won in '66? I do think that probably. How do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, what ifs by the nature are always impossible to be certain, but I very, very strongly suspect that is the case, that England wouldn't have won, because so many people were influenced by that game. The most important example, obviously, is Ramsey. He recognised how tactically England was so far behind. I think when you look at certain games, they have an influence, but none quite so much as 53. So, we already said that the 1950 game when they lost to the States, that game, it was a freak, and the World Cup then wasn't what it became later. 1970, when they lost to West Germany in Mexico, a huge disappointment, a massive game, but it didn't make people think that England are at a different level, a lower level than we believe them to be.
No, I think that's right. I think we were competitive in 1970. Yeah. It's reckoned, I think, really, that England were probably the second best team in the tournament in 1970. But yes. I think one of the things that strikes me watching the video replays of the game, of course, we are now able to watch these games through YouTube, and that's a fantastic opportunity. And if I was going to recommend anything to listeners, I would say the best visual picture of this game is actually the one with the Hungarian commentary. So if you're going to look at YouTube and see if you can find a copy of the game, I would probably avoid the Wollstonecraft commentary and see if you can find the Hungarian version, because their pictures are really quite easy to follow and quite nice and distinct. It is an amazing game. It's a historical game, and I think we've probably said as much as there is to be said about it before inviting people to go and watch the game and read about it too, as there's plenty to do that. So, okay, Karl, well, that's fantastic. So thanks so much. And we'll be back next month with another edition of the program. So goodbye to everybody, and see you again soon.
Bye.
Right, lovely. I've held it up. God, I forgot what the name of the program was. Did
sorry, I should have jumped in then. Sorry.
Never mind. I didn't. I knew what I wanted to say was something about those YouTube videos to sort of send people to go watch them. But
that's good. Yeah, that was good. Yeah, and maybe we could have mentioned some of the books that are interesting on.
Yeah, I wondered about that. Yeah, because I've got one in front of me. Yeah, I did wonder.
Anyway, obviously, Wilson's. I think Wilson's book's brilliant.
Yeah. That would have been good. Yeah. I didn't. Yeah. Shit, that's good. Well, look. So one of these days we'll do one of these on books. So that gives people some, because I think those are quite helpful, quite useful. Now we've got on the recording is made, and I'll do the technology of that and then send you it. Not tonight, but I'll do it tomorrow. 3.5 minutes left for us on this Zoom. So shall we just have a quick chat about, okay, what are we going to want to do next time? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I must admit, I mean, I've not long since read the book about winning the World Cup by, and his name's gone from me. The one that it's Hamilton's book.
Yeah.
About England winning the World Cup, which I'd sort of got all the wrong in the stick. I thought it was almost a biography of Ramsey.
Yeah.
Which it isn't quite, but there's a lot about Ramsey in it.
Oh yeah.
So that would be that would be a possibility.
Yeah. That's fine. I'm happy with that.
I mean, it's such the thing is though with the World Cup, because it's such a big subject.
Yeah. Well, you shouldn't run out of things to say. That's good.
Yes, but maybe it needs to be narrowed down. Maybe there's more than one podcast there. Maybe there's a whole one just about the tactics of '66 and the players and how Ramsey utilised them. Because there's so much there. The obvious thing is the wingless wonders, but the Hurst versus Greaves, the fitting Bobby Charlton in, that was something that came across very powerfully in that Hamilton book.
As a deep line centre forward.
That actually Charlton was a problem for Ramsey to solve. Because he didn't fit in so very easily.
I've read it, of course. So just remembering.
That he, however talented he was, and not a problem as in personality.
Not at all.
But a problem as in tactically.
Yeah, and how to get the best out of him.
Yes.
He was obviously the best player.
The strange thing to say is for all his talents, he maybe wasn't the best footballing brain. In terms of, positionally and selecting the right pass. He got all the tools, but maybe not always the best at always using them. And that's perhaps why he spent so much of his early career on the wing.
Yeah, left winger. We got less than a minute here to make a decision. It'd be nice to be specific. If we're going to do 66 World Cup,
okay, I could give you a completely different alternative and say Munich air disaster.
Yep. Although, or the fate of the Busby Babes, maybe, because the air disaster is not so interesting in itself. But just sticking with 66, could we not do a question? Why did England win the World Cup in 1966?
Yes.
Good.
Yeah.
I mean, it'll be different from what we've done today. But that's fine. I think we should have lots of variety.